Kristi Noem says her agency follows due process, but the Supreme Court says otherwise. Today's hearing exposed a dangerous contradiction that every American needs to hear about.
I think some tragic circumstances are at bay. I'd like to switch gears to due process. I have a lot of concerns about the lack of due process that your agency has been affording people in this country. In Texas, for example, you had rounded up 171 individuals, were preparing to deport them, and it wasn't until the Supreme Court issued an opinion that that was unconstitutional and that their due process rights were being violated. Did your agency actually stop and adhere to the Supreme Court's opinion? My question to you is, has those efforts ceased in your agency? Are you going to cease trying to deport people without access to due process in the courts of law in compliance with the United States Supreme Court?
Well, Congresswoman, we are following due process and using it as to how Congress has laid out to us in statute, and we are complying with all federal judges' orders as well.
Well, you weren't complying at that time. It took the United States Supreme Court to order you to comply, so you hadn't proactively complied on your own. You were intending to wrongfully deport people without access to a court hearing, without access to the rule of law, and that is why it was necessary for the United States Supreme Court,
due process does not guarantee a hearing,
who issued an opinion ordering you and your agency to comply with the due process rights of the people in this country. That's what makes our country great, is we do have access to due process. And so my comment to you is I'm hoping as you move forward, because initially as you were proceeding through these deportation processes, you were not affording people due process, and the Supreme Court has now ordered you to do so. So I am assuming by your testimony that you do intend to comply with the Supreme Court's order moving forward, and we're not going to have any more instances of wrongful deportation without proper access to due process. Is that correct?
We are following federal judges' orders, and
Good.
We are complying with due process
Well, we look
procedures
forward to
as
that.
they are laid out, as Congress has given us those tools to do that.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I have one other question about FEMA. I'm very concerned about the destruction of FEMA. You know, Texas is a state that has a lot of hurricanes, tornadoes, and natural disasters. We rely upon FEMA extensively, and I'm very worried about that. And when you are governor, though, you actually utilized FEMA for your own state. So you did recognize at the time when you were serving as a governor that FEMA played an important role in natural disasters within South Dakota. Is that correct?
Yes, we had 12 FEMA-related disasters during the 6 years I served as governor of the state of South Dakota.
But I just find it, I'm running out of time, but I just find it ironic.
What you just saw wasn't just a tense exchange between Congresswoman Johnson and Secretary Kristi Noem. This was a debate over something much bigger, the very foundation of American justice, due process. Johnson zeroed in on the fact that DHS, under Noem's leadership, attempted to deport 171 individuals without giving them a fair hearing. Think about that. Deportation isn't a minor administrative decision. It's life-changing. It can separate families, end careers, and uproot lives. And yet, these individuals were denied the chance to even stand before a judge until the Supreme Court had to step in and remind DHS of what the Constitution requires. That is staggering. Because due process isn't a courtesy, it's not optional. It is the bedrock principle of American law. It is the idea that before the government can take away your liberty, your property, or your life, you are entitled to a fair process, to be heard, to defend yourself, to have your case judged impartially. Strip that away, and you strip away the very promise that separates America from authoritarian governments where people can simply be whisked away without explanation. Now, Johnson made a crucial point. Noem and her agency did not voluntarily follow the law. They had to be forced into compliance by the Supreme Court. That suggests not just negligence, but a disregard for constitutional limits. And that should alarm every American, regardless of political party. Because once government officials decide due process is optional for one group, it sets a precedent that endangers everyone else. And then comes the irony Johnson exposed. As governor of South Dakota, Kristi Noem repeatedly relied on FEMA during natural disasters. She acknowledged its importance when tornadoes, floods, and storms hit her state. Yet now, as DHS secretary, she pushes to dismantle FEMA and offload responsibility to states that have already said they lack the resources. That's not just hypocrisy, it's reckless. Imagine Texas in the middle of a hurricane season or California battling wildfires without adequate FEMA support. Ordinary people would pay the price for a political agenda. This hearing pulled back the curtain on something critical, the disconnect between what leaders say and what they do. Noem insists her agency follows due process, yet the Supreme Court ruling says otherwise. She benefited from FEMA as governor, yet now undermines it as secretary. These contradictions aren't just talking points, they translate into real-world consequences for families facing deportation and communities facing disaster. And this is why hearings like these are so important. They are not just partisan theater. They are the one place where the public gets to see their leaders questioned under oath, stripped of the comfort of prepared talking points, and forced to reconcile their actions with the Constitution and with basic accountability. At the end of the day, this comes down to one fundamental truth. If we allow due process to be weakened, if we allow federal protections to be dismantled, we risk eroding the very safeguards that hold our democracy together. That's not hyperbole, that's history. Every time nations have walked away from due process, it has opened the door to abuse of power, discrimination, and injustice. So the question is not just whether Kristi Noem complied with a Supreme Court ruling. The question is whether Americans are willing to accept a government that treats constitutional protections as optional. And that's where you come in. These hearings matter because they give us the information we need to hold leaders accountable. If you believe due process is non-negotiable, if you believe agencies like FEMA should protect, not abandon communities, then stay engaged. Share this video, join the conversation in the comments, and don't let these issues fade into the background. Because the more we shine a light on them, the harder it becomes for those in power to ignore accountability.